Thank you. Um, Thank you to the co-panel members. Before we start the session, I would just like to tell the audience that have a look at your bag, and there might be a report which is co-authored by some of my teammates and me, which tells you the comparison between education and healthcare and how healthcare as a sector has grown. And we believe the next 10 years, education will see a lot more uh, growth, and quite a few companies from education will actually hit the capital markets. And given that thought process, we thought we will have a panel session on that. Um, to start with, from we always look at education from a macro level, but education is ideally done grounds up, and no better than Imran and Prajot know about it. So, Imran, to start with, you have been an investor in education companies since 2 decades now. How have you seen the growth right from classroom to capital markets for most of these companies?
Thanks, Atul. So that should tell you that investing in education is a patience game. So you have to be at it for a very, very long period of time. But we've actually seen, I used to, sometimes conference rooms like this are packed and sometimes they're not. And the interest in education waxes and wanes. But if you take a long-term view of education, our belief and investment thesis is that India is the most attractive education market in the world. And that is for 2 or 3 very obvious reasons. One is our demographics, which everyone knows, we're a young country. Second is we know that Indian households will sell a kidney to get their children in education because that's the only real lottery ticket that households have in India. And finally, if you look at the problems of the world, as supply chains start morphing from physical goods to a knowledge economy, the obvious beneficiary of this super cycle is going to be education. So we believe that education is a huge opportunity globally. And in India, because core education is privatized, we've got Prajot who's going to speak about his phenomenal success story in core education. But because we are largely privatized and because the problems are at massive scale, the government will never be able to solve this through their budgets, and they will need to partner with the private sector to do that. So for all of those reasons, we feel that this is a very attractive opportunity. And over the last 20 years, we've deployed about $1 billion, roughly 25% of that in education. A lot of our work has been in K-12. Including one of our most successful investment, which is Prajot. So I'm going to maybe ask Prajot to make a comment.
Prajot, yeah. Most important question over here is that, since 2 decades, the government has almost stopped giving private aids and, private aided institutes have stopped coming out. And you have the private sector still doing fantastic. However, you are marred by a lot of regulatory structures and pricing controls. How have you managed to take care of all these things?
Hi, Atul, and morning, everyone. So you spoke about the private school enrollments and the government school enrollments. Just some quick data on this. In less than a decade, 70% of enrollments earlier used to be in the government schools. That 70 has now fallen down to 50. 30% used to be in private schools. But interestingly, in the 30%, 10% used to be the private unaided ones, and the 20% used to be the private aided ones. That 20% actually has fallen down to 10, and the 10% of the private unaided ones has gone to 40. So overall, if you look at it, what's seen as a massive, let's say, a difference over the last lesser than about 10 years is the private unaided space. So one is now we are at 50-50. So 50% of our kids go to government schools, 50% come to private schools. But within private schools also, 40% is actually private unaided schools. Now, this is driven by, I guess, a lot of it has to do with CBSE schools, a lot of it has also to do with the international curriculum schools. All of that is actually driving this massive demand. Now, I think in a country as vast as India, to offer choices and options to parents is the only logical thing to do. And I think that private schools are a great enabler in that. And the government over the last about, let's say, 15 years or so, I've only seen that the policy side of it is actually getting more clearer. So in my own view, while people may talk about regulation and over-regulation, I actually think that regulation sometimes helps, because regulation means there is clarity. Because in the lack of regulation sometimes is where non-clarity exists. So if there is clarity, then you're very clear about how to operate. Now, in most states in the country, you can open up a K-12 school. You can set the price that you want to. And the only thing that gets regulated is your YOY fee increase, which is also linked to a formula, which is like a CPI plus 5% or a CPI plus 3% and the rest. That is, in my view, a big sea change from the time that we started maybe about 15 years back to now. So I actually think it's a good enabling environment which is getting built. Much more, one can argue that there is so much more that one can do. But I, for one, am very optimistic.
Praju, just a follow-up on that. Does this compromise the learning outcomes? Because that's the biggest fear always.
I actually think conversely on that subject per se, because as you offer choice and options to parents, and if it's private schools which is driving, I'm saying private enterprises in general drive, you've seen innovation and efficiency, which is the same case with private schools as well. And more private schools coming in, I actually think that the existing incumbents, which have been around since last maybe about 10 decades, about 5 decades and a century old, are also forced to then upgrade themselves. So whether it is infrastructure, whether it is curriculum, pedagogy, technology usage, or even just the way of thinking, I think there's a big change which is coming because there are new players coming into the marketplace. So I actually think that private schools do a great service to our children here in the country.
Thank you. Arushi, most of these companies which started 2 decades ago are now gearing up probably to go public. What are the key regulations which they have to look at it, and is it really possible for a formal education group to go public? Because that's the biggest question that most of the players ask. I know that Imran has got one company public which had a part as formal education. But a large group with formal education, can we go public?
So I think it's a very, very good question, Atul. And honestly, the answer to that is that today the regulation doesn't have a hurdle. If you want to go for an IPO, an education company can go for an IPO. That is the simple answer. Having said that, there are a few questions that always keep popping up in the mind. And to solve that, I look at it as a few P's approach. The first P is, what is the perception? Now, in the education sector, we haven't seen too many IPOs, which is why there is always that question of how will an IPO be perceived? If I take my company to the market, what kind of questions will come to me? What kind of scrutiny will come to me? So these are questions, and that raise some concern in an investor or maybe, a company's mind. The second one is basically your positioning, and that's where your clarity also comes in. What are you taking to the market at the end of the day? Now, as an education, education today is a very, very large terminology. You have the formal education sector, which is your K-12 and the higher ed sector, extremely regulated, but this is the not-for-profit side of it. You have various services companies, you have IT support, you have many other service providers today. So it is the services company that you're basically taking public. And if that clarity and that positioning is there, I think the story around it becomes simpler. Because then you are able to explain what your business section, for example, in an IPO document look like. You can talk about the risk factors. Possibly, because you're a service company, there is a business dependency on your counterparts, but that happens in any and every business today. In fact, if you look at the education sector, Education from a service sector side doesn't have a specific regulation. Any service company today, it's like any other service company. But if you look at some of the sectors like telecom, for example, or for example, if you look at, insurance, these are very, very heavily regulated sectors. So maybe taking companies public in those sectors which are so strictly regulated is more difficult than an education setup per se. The question is, are you able to tell your story right? And the third P to this is your positioning and your preparedness to it. Now, if you say that I want to do my IPO in the next 3 months, well, that's very optimistic in that sense. Can you do it? Maybe yes. But are you prepared? Have you done your diligence right? Have you done your paperwork right? Do you know what your structure is? Is your investor pool comfortable with the structure? Have you done those checks? Because at some point in time, the public, because in an IPO scenario, your ultimate customer is your public. They're going to poke holes. So rather than someone else poking holes, are you prepared to answer those questions? If you can solve for these, there's no reason why education companies should not be able to go public.
If regulation is, or the IPO can be done for these companies, Prajod and Imran, what is it that is stopping the education companies? And historically, public market investors are always shy of investing in education companies for various reasons. Governance being, the paramount. And while the macro numbers show growth, the companies who get listed do not, resemble that growth. How can education companies from here on go to the capital markets? And capital markets IPO is an event. What after that event? If you could throw some light on that, both Prajot, Imran, anyone can take it.
So first of all, nothing stopping education companies from going public. You'll see 2 of them this year, like Physics Wala, Emeritus. I mean, they're all well represented in this conference, and they're good, high-quality companies. They should go public. But if you take a step back, there are 2 questions. One is, do you have the financial maturity to be a publicly listed company? That has nothing to do with education, because ultimately, like Benjamin Graham said a long time ago, in the short term, public markets are voting machines. In the long term, they're weighing machines. So can you stand scrutiny to a weighing machine? Like, do you have, ultimately, wealth in public markets has only one benchmark, right? Earnings per share, EPS growth, and return on equity. If you are healthy on these 3 metrics, you'll be a very successful listed company. And that has nothing to do with education. So you have to look inwards into the financial maturity of your business. On education itself, I think education companies that meet the financial bar must take a public listing very seriously, because that's the platinum standard of transparency. I think it's time for education companies to come out of the shadows. And like Prajod rightly said, not be afraid of regulation, but embrace regulation. Because regulation, I started my career in pharmaceuticals. I was in Dr. Reddy's. It's a heavily regulated sector. It's the second largest sector in terms of exports from India, and a vibrant domestic, market. And we've seen, companies prosper over decades in pharmaceuticals. And you mentioned healthcare in your report. So there are enough examples of creating wealth under regulation, and you do that by embracing it, and also you do that by being, open. I'll give you one example of transparency which goes beyond financial metrics. One of the companies that we invested in is a company called Educational Initiatives, or EI. Many of you know about EI, and they offer assessments and personalized adaptive learning to schools. And this is a 20-year-old business. 10 years into their assessment journey, they opened up their books for 3 random controlled trials, completely voluntarily, for people to come, for education researchers to come, look at our product, and like pharmaceutical companies do random controlled trials on learning efficacy. To my mind, there's nobody else that does that. And there's no reason not to. So I think not only should education companies open up their learning data and methodology and pedagogy, but also their financial books, because at the end of the day, we are a public good. Education and healthcare are different from consumer businesses. So that's my short perspective on it.
Thanks. Prajot?
So, Atul, nothing stops education companies to go public, right? I guess nothing stops that, and Radhashi's made that point. There is every enabling feature so that you can go public. Nothing stops us. Uh, but the question to ask is, what's the right reason to go public, right? There. Uh, is it about just granting investors an exit? Is that? Or is it about building a lasting business which is really sustainable for the long term? I think those are the things that I guess founders should think about when they want to kind of think about going public. I guess one of the things that I always rue about the fact that we don't have scaled up education organizations in the country. We're a country with 1.4 billion people and 1.5 billion people. You don't have any scaled up education organization. I don't think there is a $1 billion revenue company, but you'll find that in pharmaceuticals, you'll find that in healthcare. And in healthcare, there are so many listed public companies. So Imran drew a parallel to the healthcare, and I guess it's the same thing. There are government healthcare institutions and there are private ones. And I do think that the private ones do great service by unburdening the public infrastructure. So there is great case around it. But my own views around it is that till you get to a certain kind of a scale, and there are only very few educational organizations that have got to that point, and I really rue that fact. But that is also combined with the fact that we also don't end up attracting high quality talent pool. I think that is another issue that needs to be fixed. When you go public, some of the reasons to go public could also be about being able to attract the right kind of talent pool as well. There are visibility, the high quality talent pool that comes and joins you. I think there is so much more that a country like India can benefit by the right kind of people coming and getting associated with a sector called education, which unfortunately is not the case.
This is very important because when I meet a lot of public market investors, they raise the same point. There is no scale in the companies who are getting listed. Or even if there is scale, you have probably operating into multiple buckets, and each of those buckets are, minuscule enough in their own single size. And then we say the macro numbers are huge for education. So ideally, it should be looked at it bottoms up rather than top down. But are you also hinting that before going to capital markets, there will be a lot of consolidation in the education before some large players come out in the market, probably like you, and get themselves listed?
So I'll probably answer this in two parts. At least my own view is that there are a lot of problems to solve in education in this country. But we found it useful to take one problem and solve it deeply. I get sometimes entrepreneurs get very excited with solving many problems. But we found it useful to take one problem. So we first took the problem of early years, spent about a decade kind of solving it, and then kind of decided to go for scale. We now do that with K-12 as well. Well, I'm very excited about solving many others as well. We found it useful to just go deep and to kind of solve that, because in that lies the various elements of figuring things out and also trying to get to scale ambitions. So I'm saying, I've said it very publicly that my ambition is to be able to serve 1 million kids whose life we can impact on a daily basis. And we are just 200,000 right now. So we've got a 5x journey to make there, because in a country like India, if you don't have an ambition to get to about 1 million kids whose life you can serve, I don't think you've done justice to that opportunity. So one is, we found it useful to kind of think about this in the terms of, let's say, just go deep, solve one thing at a time, rather than solve many things. Will consolidation happen? Yes, it's already happening. You can see that in K-12. You also have a lot many global consolidators now come in. And with what's happening in China, I see a lot of the British international schools as sponsors come into India as well. So the sector is fairly ripe in that sense there, offering choices too. But I'm saying all of this is in the service of finally our developed Viksit Bharat 2047, right? I'm saying, and this human capital is so very important to be able to build that. I actually think if you put all of these ingredients together, I think from a sector standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint, I don't think that we have anything which is stopping us from harnessing all the opportunities in front of you. So I'm saying we've raised private equity capital we've had investors since 2009. We had private equity capital since 2013 and continue to have financial sponsors. And will tomorrow IPO be an event for us? Maybe at the right time.
All the best for that, Prajot. I just hope that Lighthouse is the first formal education company getting listed. And in some sense, the public market investors, especially the retail bucket, who buy and probably keep for decades, are the best guys if the story is right, if the governance standards are good. Arushi, we've heard from Imran and Prajot, and primarily K-12, the laws are quite set. Higher education is still a little wobbly. Do you really think that higher education can come out from their requirements and get listed sometime?
Why not? I think it's the same story, right? In a sense, both of them are not-for-profit, student servicing or public servicing sectors. The only challenge with higher education is today, at least in K-12, I mean, it applies to all education regulated sectors, but you have the state level regulation and the central level regulation. That's where, the whole sector gets marred a little bit because there's too much to comply with. But when you look at higher ed, you have additional sectoral regulators, your professional bodies, etc. Luckily for us, the NEP and through various conversations, we've been speaking about shrinking the multiple regulators into one regulator, trying to relax that sector a bit. So once that happens, and eventually when that happens, I don't even think one should really wait for that day to come. Even today, higher education is a very good story. They're trying to service so many students. Our gross enrollment ratios are very poor. Only if we just put in more effort in higher ed, just like the way we did at K-12 at some juncture, right to education, and then, of course, private players coming in, putting in money. Look at higher education as a great investment opportunity where there is so much scale, so much other than IITs and IIMs and a few other institutions. We rarely ever hear about very high quality institutions. You have foreign universities coming in. If they can come in, why can't we internally, using private capital, sort of scale up and then take it to its next logical step?
Thank you. Probably we have 6 odd minutes, so if probably each of you all can give your concluding remarks, Imran, starting from you.
Thanks, Atul. I'm a big believer in putting your money where your mouths are. So my big message for all of you is invest in education. India is the most attractive private education market in the world. But be mindful of the 3 ways you kill an education company. We learn from crashes, right? Raising more capital than you need, in broken unit economics, and you take your eye off the ball of learning outcomes. These are the 3 ways these planes crash. And if you can veer off these 3, you can create tremendous wealth, tremendous impact, and this combination doesn't exist any other sector.
Agree to everything that Imran said because I guess you can build and scale education enterprises in India. But my own view is, Atul, that I don't think blitzscaling is possible in this sector. It does take time to build institutions of great character, and sometimes it's not years, sometimes it's decades. I think one bit of thing is about entrepreneurs showing patience and going deep rather than just wide helps the cause. I think ethical business practices, better corporate governance, having customer centricity, which is student centricity, and finally education first. I guess these are core ingredients for any high quality enterprise to be able to attract the right kind of talent pool and also the I actually think good quality also capital. I think there is both the right talent pool and good quality capital that is available for good companies here. And I think to partner with the right kind of people makes a lot of sense. I remember partnering along with Imran and Gaja way back in time. And did it help us? I can tell you, Imran was a guy who actually pushed us to think about safety as a core factor. Up till then, I used to think all of my preschools and schools were safe, but Imran was the one who actually sparked that whole thought with us, so much so that we decided to certify all of our chain of preschools and schools to third-party things. So I'm saying high-quality people, high-quality capital brings a lot to the sector as well, but one must be mindful who you partner with.
Arushi?
I think I can say ditto and end it because it really sums it up. But just one thought here is that, use regulation, use the policy change and the environment today to your advantage if you're looking at listing an education company. At some juncture, when you're private, you're always looking inwards. If there is an issue, you'll solve it inwards. When you're looking at a public sector market, you're basically disclosing everything to the table. Now, thankfully, regulations are changing. If we speak about what Prajot said, the fee regulation laws, we speak about, we don't talk about profiteering anymore because the laws already tell us how to basically decide the fee. There are filing requirements, there are transparency requirements, and more, education groups are doing that. So if they are being so open about it, my risk factor or my fear of what if they find out that I'm doing this decreases. So your regulations are basically bringing in a lot more transparency and accountability, which is likely to help the sector, in the listing space.
Thank you. Just a couple of points from my side. I think, any player looking to go themselves to the capital market should understand that IPO is an event and life changes after the event completely for you and your investor in both in separate ways. Probably your investor is going to get his carry and GP money, and for the company there is going to be a lot more responsibility living the quarter by quarter for a seasonal business, and hence you need to plan and go, as Prajot was saying, significantly deep. Second is that education is a slow journey. It's an arithmetic progression, not a geometric progression. It's not like you set up a factory and overnight you will have full capacity. You have to be mindful of the fact that it is going to take its own due course of time, and you will have to allow to give its due course of time. Then only you will probably able to do justice to your clients and to your investors. With that, thank you very much, and over to you.